The cell was cold, damp, and smelled of rust and loneliness. Mark Dalton had been in Blackridge Prison for 7 long years, serving a 15-year sentence for armed robbery gone wrong. Every night he counted the cracks in the ceiling, whispering his wife's name, Clara, like a prayer. She had been his light through the darkness, writing him letters every week, promising to wait, promising love. But that morning, the letter he received wasn't like the others. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. When he tore it open, his heart froze. It wasn't from Clara, it was from his old friend, Jacob. The letter read, "Mark, I wish I didn't have to tell you this. Clara's been seeing someone. It's been going on for months. Everyone in town knows. I thought you deserved the truth." Mark's hands trembled. The paper slipped from his grip and fluttered to the floor like a fallen leaf. His chest tightened, breath quickened. The guards walked by, laughing about something meaningless. But to Mark, the world had stopped. Every memory he had of her, every smile, every kiss, every promise burned away in that moment. He punched the wall until his knuckles bled. The cellmate across from him shouted, "What the hell's wrong with you, Dalton?" But Mark didn't he answer. He couldn't. His mind spiraled, consumed by images of Clara with another man. Who was he? When did it start? Did she ever really love him? For days, Mark didn't eat. He replayed the letter in his head until it was carved into his soul. The rage built quietly, dangerously, and then, one night, he heard 2 guards whispering outside his cell, talking about the upcoming construction on the east wall. That meant fewer guards, weaker security. That's when the thought first hit him. He could escape. It started as a whisper of insanity, but soon became an obsession. He studied guard patterns, memorized shift changes, and started talking to a smuggler in the laundry room who could get him what he needed: a makeshift key, a small blade, even a map of the drainage tunnels. 1 week later, Mark stared at the moon through the tiny cell window. "Clara," he muttered, his voice low and broken. "You betrayed me, but I'll see you soon." As the sirens wailed in the distance that night, Mark wasn't in his cell anymore. The broken bars told the story of his rage. He was gone, crawling through mud and blood toward the only thing that mattered now: revenge. The storm raged like an untamed beast the night Mark Dalton made his escape from Blackridge Prison. The sky cracked open with thunder as rain hammered down on the concrete walls, drowning out every sound that could betray him. For weeks, he had watched and waited, memorizing every guard's movement, every blind spot in the cameras, every second when the shadows were deep enough to hide his sins. His mind had turned the plan into scripture. He knew it, word for word, and tonight he would finally live it. The first step was the laundry room, where he slipped out unnoticed in a stolen maintenance uniform. His heart beat fast but steady, like a soldier before battle. He had bribed an inmate named Collins for the fake badge and the small screwdriver that now sat hidden in his sleeve. Collins thought he was helping a man desperate for freedom. He had no idea he was fueling revenge. The east wall was under construction, its fencing weak, mud thick, and the guards distracted by the storm. Mark moved like a shadow, blending with the chaos. When he reached the drain tunnel, he paused, looking back at the prison one last time. Behind those walls lay years of pain, betrayal, and wasted love. Ahead lay justice, his kind of justice. He dropped to his knees and crawled into the tunnel, the stench of filth clawing at his throat. Rats scattered ahead of him, the cold mud sucking at his hands, but he didn't stop. Each scrape, each bruise, each heartbeat whispered Clara's name. When he finally emerged from the other side, he collapsed onto the wet earth, gasping for air. The rain washed over him, mixing with blood and grime, but he didn't feel it. He was free. He laughed a low, broken laugh that echoed through the trees. It wasn't joy, it was madness. Freedom wasn't the reward. It was the weapon he would use to make her pay. Mark stumbled through the woods, guided only by lightning flashes that lit the path ahead. He found an old cabin, abandoned and forgotten like him. Inside, he stripped off the prison uniform and found dry clothes in a dusty closet. A cracked mirror hung above the sink. When he looked into it, the man staring back didn't look human. Hollow eyes, bleeding knuckles, a face carved by rage. "You did this, Clara," he whispered, running a trembling hand through his wet hair. "You broke me." His reflection didn't blink. He wrapped his wounded hand with a torn towel and searched the drawers until he found car keys, rusted but functional. Outside, an old pickup truck waited like fate itself. He sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. For a moment, he closed his eyes and pictured Hertha way she used to smile when she kissed him goodbye. The way her voice trembled when she promised to wait. Lies, all of it. He started the engine, and the roar of the truck merged with the thunder. As he drove down the lonely forest road, rain slashing the windshield, his mind repeated one thought over and over, like a heartbeat. She chose him over me. She faced me tonight. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, Clara had no idea that her past was racing toward her. Drenched in rain, driven by vengeance, and unstoppable as the storm itself. By the time Mark Dalton reached the outskirts of town, dawn had started to bleed across the sky, painting the horizon in shades of ash and silver. The rain had eased, leaving behind a thin fog that curled like smoke around the tires of the old pickup truck he had stolen. Every turn of the wheel brought him closer to the place he had once called home, though now it felt like enemy territory. The familiar streets looked foreign to him, poisoned by memories of betrayal. He parked a few blocks away from Maple Drive, his pulse hammering in his throat as he stared at the dim outline of the house he had built with Clara. The white fence, once a symbol of love and stability, now looked like a cage waiting to close in on him again. He watched from the shadows as lights flickered on inside. There she was, Clara, moving across the kitchen in her robe, pouring coffee, her movements calm, normal, undeserved. Mark's jaw tightened. How could life be so peaceful for her while he had rotted behind bars? His hands clenched around the steering wheel until his nails dug into the leather. Then another figure appeared in the doorway, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing nothing but a t-shirt and boxers. The sight was a knife twisting in his gut. Rage flooded him so fast it nearly blinded him. He could feel his chest rise and fall with the fury that had been festering for months. He wanted to storm in right then, to tear the world apart until she felt what he had felt. But something in him, something cold and calculating, held him back. Not yet, not like this. He needed to make her see him, to fear him, to understand what she had done. He stepped out of the truck and walked to the edge of the driveway, the mud sucking at his boots. He stood there for a long time, hidden by the morning mist, staring through the window as the two of them laughed together over breakfast. His heart screamed, but his mind stayed silent, focused. He needed a plan. He walked around the house, careful not to make a sound, his eyes scanning for every entry point. The back door still had the same weak latch he had promised to fix years ago, but never did. Fitting, he muttered under his breath. He tried the handle. It moved slightly, but stayed locked. He smiled faintly. Tomorrow night, maybe. He couldn't risk it now. Daylight was rising fast, and the town wasn't as forgiving as the dark. Mark returned to the truck, his clothes soaked again from the damp air, his hands shaking from the restraint it took to walk away. As he drove off, he caught one last glimpse of her through the window, tucking her hair behind her ear as she kissed the man goodbye. It was a simple, loving gesture, one she used to do for him. It shattered something inside. He drove aimlessly for hours, replaying the image over and over until the lines between memory and madness blurred. Eventually, he pulled over near a motel on the edge of town. He paid in cash, using a fake name he'd rehearsed in prison, and checked into a small room that smelled of mold and cheap whiskey. As he sat on the bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, a dark calm washed over him. "Tomorrow," he whispered, his voice low and certain. "Tomorrow you'll know what it feels like to lose everything." The storm outside had passed, but inside Mark Dalton, it was only beginning. The motel room was silent, except for the faint hum of the old refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock mounted crookedly above the door. Mark Dalton sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, his mind spiraling through thoughts that twisted tighter with every passing second. Sleep had eluded him completely. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Clara's face illuminated by that morning light, her soft smile aimed at another man, and it made his blood boil until his heart thudded painfully against his ribs. He reached for the small notepad he had stolen from the motel's front desk and began to write. Not words of reflection, but a plankled, deliberate, methodical. He listed everything he needed: a weapon, gloves, new clothes, and a way to disappear afterward. He drew the layout of the house from memory, every room, every door, every window he had once painted himself. It felt almost poetic, his life's work becoming the stage for its own destruction. As he stared at his sketch, his mind drifted back to the man he had seen with her. He didn't know his name yet, but he would. He had connections, people he could call in favors, from men who owed him from his old days before prison. They lived in the city's underbelly, where questions were answered for the right price. Mark used the motel phone, dialing a number he hadn't called in 7 years. "Vince," he said, when the voice on the other end answered, half surprised, half terrified. "I need information, fast." Vince was a small-time criminal who once worked with him during his robbery days. After a pause, Vince replied cautiously, "You shouldn't even be out, Dalton. You know they're looking for you, right?" Mark ignored it. "Clara Dalton, Maple Drive. Find out who's with her. I'll make it worth your time." The line went quiet, then a slow exhale. "You always did have a temper, Mark. Give me a few hours." Mark hung up, his pulse steady now. The calm before the storm. He showered, shaved the stubble from his jaw, and dressed in clean clothes bought from a thrift store down the street. He needed to blend in, not stand out. At a diner nearby, he ate his first proper meal in years, sitting by the window with his back to the wall, eyes scanning every person who walked past. It was strange, almost surreal, being part of the world again after so long, seeing people laugh, eat, live while he sat there plotting death. When Vince called back that afternoon, his voice carried both fear and curiosity. Her new boyfriend's name is Ryan Hayes, works at a car dealership downtown, been with her for nearly a year. She tells people her husband died in prison. The words hit Mark like a sledgehammer. Died in prison. So that's how she explained his absence, erased his existence, buried him alive while she played house with someone else. Appreciate it, Mark said coldly, and hung up. He didn't need to hear more. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Mark drove back toward Maple Drive. He parked down the street again, the house bathed in orange twilight. He watched her through the window, cooking dinner, humming softly, unaware that her past was sitting just beyond the glass, watching. His hand rested on the glove compartment, where a newly purchased knife glinted under the fading light. He traced his fingers along the blade, whispering, "You lied. Now it's my turn." Outside, the world grew darker, and inside the car, Mark Dalton's plan for revenge finally came to life. Night fell like a curtain over Maple Drive, swallowing the quiet suburban street in stillness, while Mark Dalton's heartbeat echoed louder than the ticking clock on the dashboard. He had been sitting in the truck for nearly 3 hours, watching Clara's house from the shadows, waiting for the lights to go out. Every flicker from her window made his pulse tighten. Every silhouette reminded him of what had been stolen from him: his life, his marriage, his dignity. He had rehearsed this moment in his head so many times that it felt like déjà vu. He knew where she kept the spare key under the potted plant, how the back door latch could be nudged open with the flat edge of a knife, and how the floorboard near the kitchen creaked if stepped on too hard. He waited until the clock struck midnight, then stepped out of the truck, pulling his hood over his face as he moved silently through the fog. The air smelled of wet leaves and regret. He reached the back door, crouched, and lifted the pot with trembling hands. The key was still there. She had never changed it, not once in 7 years. "You never expected I'd come home, did you?" he muttered. Sliding the key into the lock, he pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The house hit him with a wave of nostalgia and pain. The scent of lavender candles, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the same framed photo of their wedding still hanging in the hallway. It was as if time had stopped inside, trapping memories like ghosts. He took a slow step forward, every muscle tense, listening for any sound. The floor creaked beneath him, and he froze. From upstairs, a soft laugh drifted through the silence. Clara's voice. Then another, deeper one followed. Ryan, the rage he had buried for hours, erupted in his chest like fire. He gripped the knife in his jacket pocket until his knuckles turned white. He crept up the stairs, one step at a time, the shadows swallowing him whole. Outside the bedroom door, he could hear them talking, their voices low, intimate, familiar. "I can't believe it's been a year," Ryan said. "You've made me happier than I've ever been." Clara's reply came with a soft chuckle. "I'm glad I found you, Ryan, after what happened with Mark. I thought I'd never trust anyone again." Mark's vision blurred. "After what happened with Mark." The words played over and over in his head until all logic evaporated. He pressed his ear to the door and heard the creak of the bed. That was all it took. His body moved before his mind could stop it. He kicked the door open, the sound exploding through the house like a gunshot. Clara screamed, and Ryan jumped from the bed, eyes wide with shock. For a moment, no one spoke, only the sound of rain against the window filled the silence. "Mark." Clara's voice trembled, barely a whisper. "You're dead." He took a step forward, soaked from the storm, eyes burning with hate. "You should have left me that way." Ryan moved to shield her, his hands raised in panic. "Hey, man, let's talk about this." But Mark lunged, shoving him back. The knife flashed in the dim light as Ryan stumbled. Clara screamed again, grabbing Mark's arm, trying to pull him away. "Please, don't do this," she cried, tears streaming down her face. Her touch froze him for just a single second that kept him from plunging the blade. That hesitation was enough for Ryan to shove him back and send the knife clattering to the floor. They struggled, crashing into the nightstand, breaking glass, furniture splintering beneath their weight. Mark snarled, his strength fueled by fury and heartbreak. It was chaos, loud and violent, but beneath it all was a single, twisted truth. Mark Dalton had finally come home. The room exploded into chaos, a storm of screams, grunts, and the sound of splintering wood as Mark Dalton fought like a man possessed. His mind was gone, there was no reason left, only rage and betrayal driving every movement. Ryan grabbed his wrist, trying to push him away, but Mark's strength was fueled by 7 years of pain and humiliation. They crashed into the dresser, sending a lamp shattering to the floor, sparks flashing for a brief instant before plunging the room into darkness again. Clara cried out, her voice cracking with fear. "Stop it, both of you." But the men were beyond words now, locked in a violent dance of vengeance and desperation. Ryan threw a punch that grazed Mark's cheek, splitting the skin open, but Mark barely flinched. He grabbed Ryan by the collar and slammed him against the wall so hard that the picture frames fell around them. In the dim light, Ryan's face twisted in terror as Mark hissed through his teeth, "You took everything from me." Ryan gasped, "You did that yourself," before shoving him back, catching Mark off guard. The knife still lay on the carpet, glinting faintly in the flickering shadows, forgotten for a heartbeat as they wrestled across the room. Clara darted forward, trying to pull them apart, her hands shaking as she screamed Mark's name, but he didn't even hear her. The years in prison had stripped away his humanity, left him with nothing but raw survival instincts. He swung wildly, his fist connecting with Ryan's jaw, sending him sprawling. In that moment, Mark saw the knife again, just inches away. He dove for it, snatching it from the floor. Ryan tried to rise, blood dripping from his nose, but Mark lunged forward and drove the blade downward. The sound was sickening, a wet, heavy thud, followed by a choked gasp. Ryan's eyes widened in shock, then glazed over as he collapsed, motionless, his body hitting the floor with a dull thump. Clara froze, her hands over her mouth, staring at the blood spreading across the carpet, red and alive. "Oh my God, Mark, what have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling so violently it barely made a sound. Mark stood over the body, chest heaving, eyes wide, the knife still trembling in his grip. For a second, it was as if time stopped. The rain outside, the thunder, the sound of her sobbing, all of it faded. He dropped the knife, his hands shaking, and looked at her. He deserved it, he said hoarsely, his voice broken. You both did. Clara stepped back, tears streaming down her face. No, Mark, this isn't you. He laughed, but it was hollow, almost mad. You don't know me anymore. His gaze flicked to the doorway as red and blue lights began to flash faintly through the rain outside. Neighbors must have heard the struggle. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every heartbeat. Clara turned toward the window in panic, then back to him. You have to run, she cried, but he didn't move. He just stared at her, expressionless, drenched in blood and rain. As the realization hit him, he had nothing left to run for. The sound of approaching footsteps and shouting voices filled the air. Police, step away from the victim. Mark's eyes darted around the room, his breathing erratic. He could flee, jump through the window, vanish into the night again, but part of him didn't want to. The fight was over. The vengeance was done. He looked at Clara one last time, her face pale and broken, and whispered, I told you I'd come home. Then he raised his hands slowly as the door burst open. Flashlights blinding him, guns drawn, voices shouting commands he didn't hear. All he could feel was the blood on his hands, warm, real, final. The room pulsed with chaos as flashing red and blue lights bled through the shattered window, washing everything in a dizzying rhythm of color and despair. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the echo of Clara's sobs. Mark Dalton stood frozen, his hands raised halfway, the knife lying near his boot, still glistening under the trembling light. The front door burst open, and 4 officers stormed in with guns drawn, their voices cutting through the thunder. Freeze, don't move, they shouted, but Mark didn't flinch. He barely even breathed. He stared blankly at the body on the Florian's body end, then at Clara, who had sunk to her knees, her hands shaking as she tried to stifle the sobs spilling from her throat. The lead officer advanced cautiously, weapon steady, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. Mark Dalton, you're under arrest for murder, he barked, his voice harsh yet uncertain, as if he too could feel the weight of the tragedy before him. Mark didn't resist when they grabbed his arms and forced him to the ground. The cold floor pressed against his cheek as the cuffs clicked around his wrists, but he didn't fight. He felt oddly calm, detached, almost relieved. The struggle was over. The rage that had consumed him for so long had burned itself out, leaving only emptiness. You don't understand, Clara cried, her voice desperate as the officers pulled Mark to his feet. He wasn't always like this. Please, he was sick, he needed help. But her words were lost in the noise as more police swarmed the house, photographing the scene, collecting evidence, marking every drop of blood that had spilled across the carpet. One officer read Mark his rights, but the words blurred together like static. He barely heard them. His gaze stayed fixed on Clara, who stared back at him through a curtain of tears. Their eyes met hers, full of grief, his hollow, tired, and resigned. For a fleeting moment, he almost reached out, but the chains around his wrists clinked, reminding him of the life he had chosen. They led him out into the rain, his bare feet slipping on the wet pavement as thunder rolled overhead. The neighbors stood outside in their robes, whispering, their faces pale and curious. That's him, the escaped convict, one of them murmured. He killed that man in cold blood. Mark didn't look at them. He didn't look. The world around him had shrunk to the sound of rain hitting the police car roof as they pushed him into the back seat. The leather seat was cold, the handcuffs digging into his skin, but he didn't care. Through the rear window, he caught one last glimpse of Clara standing in the doorway, drenched and shaking, watching as they took him away. Her lips moved, but he couldn't hear her words. Maybe she was saying his name. Maybe she was saying goodbye. The drive to the station was silent, except for the low crackle of the radio. The officer in the passenger seat read from a file, muttering about how Dalton had been presumed dead after a riot years ago, how his body was never found. "Guess the bastard fooled everyone," he said under his breath. Mark closed his eyes, leaning his head against the window. The rain outside blurred the lights into streaks of red and white. For the first time in years, he didn't feel anger, just exhaustion. When they arrived, the officers dragged him out, booked him, and led him through the sterile halls of the county jail. As the cell door clanged shut behind him, Mark sat down on the hard cot, staring at his cuffed hands. "You finally made it home," he whispered to himself, voice flat and broken. Outside, the storm faded, leaving only silencing the faint echo of a life destroyed by love, lies, and vengeance. The interrogation room was a square box of stale air, humming fluorescent lights, and peeling gray paint that made everything inside it look lifeless. Mark Dalton sat in the metal chair, wrists chained to the table, eyes fixed on the faint reflection of his face in the one-way glass across from him. He looked older than he remembered, hollow eyes, bruised jaw, dried blood on his cheek that the rain hadn't washed away. Hours had passed since his arrest, but he hadn't spoken a word. The officers came and went, leaving him in silence, hoping the weight of his guilt would crush him into confession. It didn't. Mark wasn't afraid of punishment. He had already lived through hell. Finally, the door opened with a groan, and Detective Harris walked in, a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a voice like sandpaper. He dropped a thick folder onto the table and sat across from Mark, studying him carefully. "You've caused quite a scene, Dalton," he said slowly, flipping open the folder. "Escaped, convict, murder, domestic connection. It's a tragic headline waiting to happen." Mark didn't respond. Harris leaned forward, folding his hands. "You want to tell me why? You had 7 years left on your sentence. You could have walked free someday. Why throw it away?" Mark stared at him, then finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "Because I was already serving a life sentence," he said. Harris frowned, not sure what to make of the answer. "Your wife's alive," he continued carefully. "She's giving her statement right now. Says you were a good man once." Mark's jaw clenched. "Once," he echoed bitterly. The detective opened a photo from the folder, crime scene picture of Ryan's body on the floor, blood staining the carpet, Clara crying in the background. He slid it across the table. "That's what you did. That's not love." Mark stared at the photo, unblinking. His reflection in the glossy surface looked like a stranger. "He took my life before I ever touched him," he said, voice trembling with something between anger and grief. "I sat in a cage for 7 years, dreaming of her, believing she was waiting. She moved on, told people I was dead, replaced me like I was nothing." Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. "People move on, Dalton. That's what happens when you disappear." Mark's gaze snapped up, sharp and full of fire. "I didn't disappear. I was buried alive." The room fell silent. The hum of the lights grew louder, filling the space between them. Harris leaned back in his chair, studying him again. You know you're not getting out of this, right? The best you can do is explain yourself. Maybe the court shows mercy. Mark laughed softly, hollow and humorless. Mercy, he said. I stopped believing in mercy a long time ago. The detective hesitated before closing the folder. She's not pressing for the death penalty, he said quietly. She says she still sees the man she married, somewhere under all that anger. Mark's expression flickered just for a second, but then hardened again. Tell her not to, he muttered. Tell her to forget I ever existed. Harris stood, collecting his papers. You really loved her, didn't you? Mark didn't answer right away. He looked at the reflection of himself again, the ghost of who he used to be. I still do, he said finally, and that's the cruelest part of all. Harris paused, then left the room, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. The hum of the lights returned, steady and merciless. Mark sat in silence, his eyes fixed on nothing, as if the walls themselves were swallowing him whole. For the first time, he understood what true imprisonment was. It wasn't the bars or the chains. It was the weight of everything he could never undo. The courtroom was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock above the judge's bench, each second cutting through the tension like a blade. Mark Dalton sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a wrinkled gray prison uniform, wrists still cuffed in front of him. His lawyer whispered last-minute words of hope that neither of them believed. Across the room, Clara sat in the front row, her eyes red and swollen, her hands trembling in her lap. She couldn't look at him directly, yet she couldn't look away either. Every time their eyes almost met, she flinched, as if burned by the ghost of what they once were. The prosecutor's voice echoed as he summarized the case: escape from lawful custody, first-degree murder, attempted assault. Each word felt like a nail in Mark's coffin. Harris, the detective who had interrogated him, sat behind the prosecution table, watching with quiet resignation. He had seen monsters in his career, but Mark didn't fit that mold. He was something far more tragic, a man who let love rot into vengeance. When the judge finally entered, the entire courtroom rose, and Mark felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. The judge's eyes were cold, analytical, untouched by the emotion suffocating the room. Mr. Dalton, he began, voice firm but steady. You stand before this court charged with escape from custody and the murder of Ryan Keller. The jury has reached a unanimous verdict. Mark exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the polished wood of the table before him. Guilty on all counts. The words landed like thunder. Clara covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face, her sobs muffled but piercing in the silence that followed. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He only nodded slightly, as if acknowledging what he had known all along. The judge continued, You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Life imprisonment, 2 words that meant nothing and everything all at once. The gavel struck, sharp and final. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, flashes from the press cameras lighting up Mark's face like lightning in a storm. He turned his head slowly toward Clara. Their eyes finally met, and for a brief, haunting moment, the world around them disappeared. She mouthed something, he couldn't hear it, but he knew what it was. I'm sorry. He almost smiled, not out of forgiveness, but because he knew she meant it. The guards stepped forward, pulling him to his feet, their grip firm but not cruel. As they led him toward the door, his lawyer murmured, "We can appeal." Mark shook his head faintly. "No," he said softly, "it's over." The heavy doors swung open, and he stepped into the corridor lined with officers and reporters. Questions were shouted, cameras flashed, but he heard nothing. His mind was somewhere else, in the echoes of laughter from years ago, in the warmth of a home that no longer existed. As he was escorted toward the waiting van, he caught a glimpse of the gray sky through a narrow window. It looked like the same sky that had poured rain over him the night he escaped, but now it was empty, drained of purpose. He realized then that his freedom had never been stolen by bars or walls. It had been taken by the choices he made in the name of love. When the doors shut behind him, sealing him away once more, the world outside moved on without him. For everyone else, it was the end of a case. For Mark, it was just another beginning of a lifetime spent remembering the woman who destroyed him, and the man he had become to destroy her. The cell was silent except for the faint dripping of water from a rusted pipe and the scratching of a pen against paper. Mark Dalton sat on his narrow cot, the dim light from the corridor casting a thin yellow line across his face as he wrote. Months had passed since the trial, months that had stretched like years inside the gray walls of Blackridge Prison. The same place he had once escaped from. Irony, he thought bitterly. The same walls he had broken through now held him tighter than ever. His cellmate slept on the other side, snoring softly, but Mark barely noticed. He was lost in his writing, every word spilling out like a confession, though no priest would ever read it. The letter was addressed to Clara. He had started and torn it up at least 10 times before, each attempt either too angry or too broken. This time, he didn't stop to think. He just wrote what was left inside him. "Clara, I've tried to hate you," the letter began, "but hate is just love that's gone rotten, and there's still too much of you in me for it to die. I thought revenge would make me whole again, but all it did was show me how empty I've become. I killed him thinking I'd finally be free, but I only built another prison, one no escape plan can break." His hand trembled, the ink smudging slightly where a drop of water, or maybe a tear, had fallen. He continued, "When I saw you in court, I didn't see betrayal. I saw fear. I saw regret. And for the first time, I realized you were human too. Maybe you found comfort in someone else, because I was already gone, long before the prison took me. Maybe we both stopped being us the day they locked the door." Mark leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, listening to the distant echoes of other prisoners shouting down the hall. Somewhere, someone was laughing, another crying. The sounds blended into a hollow symphony of men who had lost everything. He resumed writing. "Don't visit me. Don't write back. Live your life, Clara. That's all the punishment I need to know you still can. As for me, I'll keep dreaming of the days before everything broke. I'll remember the smell of your hair after the rain, the way you used to hum when you cooked breakfast, the way you said my name when you still meant it." The pen slowed as he wrote the final lines. "I escaped once to kill for love. Maybe someday I'll find a way to escape again, to forgive for love. Until then, I'll serve my sentence. Not to the court, not to the law, but to the memory of us." He signed his name at the bottom, folded the letter neatly, and placed it inside an envelope that smelled faintly of ink and regret. When the morning came, he handed it to a guard he trusted and asked him to mail it. The guard nodded silently, eyes heavy with understanding. That night, Mark sat by the tiny window of his cell, staring at the moonlight filtering through the bars. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to run. He felt still, at peace, maybe, or something close to it. He whispered into the darkness, "Goodbye, Clara." And as the words left his lips, the weight on his chest finally loosened. Outside, the moon hung high over Blackridge Prison, pale and distant, watching silently over a man who had finally stopped fighting his fate.